Give just a couple minutes here for folks to join. Thank you all for coming. While we're waiting for folks, I'd love to know where y'all are coming from. Feel free to share your role, your organization, what part of the world you're a part of. Would love to just know who I'm speaking to. Yeah, I see a couple coming in. Thank you all for sharing. Oh, we got Canada in the house. Hello. San Antonio, what up? I worked in a long time in Houston ISD, so always smile when I see some of my Texas folks in here. Oh, Colorado Springs. I think Colorado Springs is where is Colorado College in Colorado Springs? I love that school. That's a school that's done right by a lot of my kids. So if that's where Colorado Springs is, awesome. Germany. Wow. That's amazing. Thank you for being here. New Jersey. Oh, so yeah. Colorado College is a great school, great financial aid. Highly would recommend that school. Awesome. I'm gonna give it like 2 more minutes and then we'll kick off here. Thank you all for being here. So cool to just see people from all over connected today. Tallahassee, awesome. So we got sprinkles from most of the United States here, and even a couple of other countries from Europe, from Canada. Wow, Wyoming, the lead in our district AI task force. Okay, well, I'm hoping that there's at least 1 to 2 things I could offer today that is going to be supportive, and that I definitely think my presentation is geared for you in the way that I've designed it. So hopefully it's helpful. That seems like exciting work. Congratulations for being able to do that. That seems very exciting. And I'm gonna share the slide deck so you all have it. And I'll share a little bit about my background and context so you can know, how I'm mentoring this space as well. But I host a podcast, so there's a lot more stuff that I won't be sharing today that does exist in the world, in my world, on my podcast. So would just invite that as well as you're going on your walks or your car drives across Wyoming. All right. I'm going to kick us off so that we can get started here. Just pause this. So we might have a few other folks join us. That's cool. But I want to make sure that we have a lot of time for some just good discussion, good questions, and just sharing what I know. And hopefully it's beneficial to you all here. So just a couple other late ads. Sorry, I'm just adding these. Okay. So, if you're in this session, hopefully everybody's in the right session. My goal really today is to share, so I've been in education for over a decade. I'll share a little bit more of my background in just a second, but really this session is designed for you all to come away with like some higher level strategies, but also some like really concrete tactics that you can use to implement AI or talk about AI within your school community. I would also more broadly say that this could also be for applicable to an organization as well. I was really thinking organization also in the context of this. So if you're here, welcome. Really excited to talk about this. This is what we'll be talking about and having some dialogue about for the next hour. So I'm Daniel Lopez. I'm actually, in addition to some just my lifelong educator experiences, I actually host and have founded the AI Education Conversation. So at the end, I'll share some resources there, but it is one of the leading AI and education conversation podcasts. My goal is to always do episodes on a weekly basis on a variety of topics, but many of the topics that I have been able to talk with folks about, chief academic officers, superintendents, CEOs of nonprofits, national nonprofits, is about implementation. and AI. And so in addition to sharing much of what I've learned over my career, I'm going to also be elevating some of their voices in this space around things that they have shared on some of my podcast episodes. And I will also be linking towards the end some episodes that you may be interested in checking out based on your unique context, maybe things that you're thinking about, areas that spark for you, based on this. And again, most of those are an hour or less. So just throw it on when you're on a drive or something like that, and it may give you some other additional pointers that you can take away and apply within your unique context. So I wanted to briefly just start about my AI learning journey to give you some context as well of how I'm entering the space. So over the course of my education career, I've actually been very similar to this guy. I've actually been highly skeptical in my role. When I was a teacher, I taught for a couple of years, and then I was also a counselor for a few years. And then I also led a counseling team across Houston Independent School District, which is one of the largest school districts in the United States, for about another 5 years. And in each of those roles, I have to be honest, like my perspective around technology and education was like I was mostly skeptical. And I think the reason why is because I had just been personally had experiences or been surrounded by colleagues who have just been burned by like clunky technology that makes the job more difficult, that like makes things that should be much easier like more complicated. And that is not good for folks who work in education. Like our jobs are so hard already as it is, and like I don't think that anything should be happening that is like going to make our jobs harder. So I would say that that was my initial mindset, and a mindset that I was kind of working through towards most of my educational career, working towards. I think if folks were to then ask me how I would describe AI, I mean, my perception of AI around the same time was I was thinking they're clumsy robots. Like, yeah, I know there's these like universities in Boston and all these places, they're doing some things around artificial intelligence, but most of what I could tell is these are some clumsy robots. And I mean, that's not going to really impact my day to day. There's not going to be really a change there. Uh, then comes ChatGPT. And so, but like many folks, last winter break, I'm taking my winter break, trying to decompress, getting my head right for the next semester. And then I started watching some of these YouTube videos. I heard about this thing called ChatGPT. I was like, this seems pretty cool. Let me open up an account. I did. And I started to type things like, hey, generate a lesson plan around, I don't know, seventh grade United States history. And I just saw what it gave back. And I was like, that was my reaction. I was just so surprised and shocked. I could not believe what I was getting back. And that really changed my thinking tremendously about what good technology, what effective technology could actually do to help make people's lives easier in education. And so I feel like since then, I've been drinking the Kool-Aid. My goal is to really spend a lot of time in continuing my own AI learning journey to really understand like really high impact use cases to determine to what extent this technology can actually transform education and make the lives easier for all of us and our colleagues who are doing the hard work of enhancing this educational experience for our students, and then for our students, like setting them up for the world that they're going to inherit, not the world that they currently live in, and finding ways to ensure that they're competitive for the world of 5 years from now and not the world of today. So that's how I'm entering the space. I will also say, as I think about some of the unique lenses I've had the privilege of exploring from my vantage point in education, I've had a lot of, high level managing director and district leader level roles. And I think the privilege there for me has been I've been able to like really see like a bird's eye view of the system, of how it works, how certain departments interact with each other, how certain initiatives lead to behaviors and people, and how those things actually led. And so I'm bringing in some of my lens and what I've learned from like a systems level leadership into this conversation. I've also been in a lot of practitioner roles and a lot of tactical roles, like I think many of us have. And we obviously know that tends to be like that house of cards where you have to build things very carefully and thoughtfully. Your processes matter and they have to be very careful. And if one thing doesn't line up with the others, it could all crumble. And so I'm bringing in some of that practitioner process-based lens well. And then finally, I'm bringing in my relationships with people. Like I think, as we all know, what's so critical to getting something done in education, to making it happen, is it's the dynamics between people. It's your relationships. And then it's also the things that motivate people. All of those things are important when you think about implementation, whether it's a small initiative or whether it's a really large, widespread initiative. And so I'm bringing in layers of all of those into this conversation as I share some of the tactics and strategies that I think you can use when you're implementing and talking about AI. So that being said, I'd love to know just from your perspective. And throughout, I'm going to include some questions, and so I'm hoping we can make this a little bit more of a conversation rather than just me talking at you for the next 50 minutes. But I'd just be curious to know right now, as of today, 2024, 15 months post chat GPT. Like, what would you say are some of the perspectives or maybe first words that come to mind when you think some of your colleagues, what they think about AI? Words that come to mind, statements, mindsets, are they like me and highly skeptical, as I mentioned? What's coming up for you all? Exciting. Okay, that's good. I think it's very good when we see positive ones. Scared, but maybe intrigued. Fear and skepticism. Yeah, those are some helpful ones. Life changing. Ooh. Early adopters, automatic association with student. Yeah. Yep. Potential of a cautious. Yep. So what productivity? These are helpful. What I would say is just, oh, that's another good one. Frustration. When I, just from my perspective, what I have noticed when I'm talking to folks, and I will say that even though I'm the AI guy amongst my friends and amongst my colleagues in the education ecosystem, most of the folks I work with still don't really use AI. Right. In education, what I've also observed is when you look at most of the practitioners who are in a public school today, this could be different within private institutions. They're actually not using AI, right? So as a result of that, their mindsets tend to be around one of three different things. As somebody mentioned before, it tends to be around the cheating. They've heard or read articles about academic integrity, cheating, and that's like how they're entering those conversations. It tends to be the Terminator thing. Oh my God, this thing is gonna take over the world and kill us all. Like it's finally here. Like this has finally happened. Like the movies are true. All of those things. Or it tends to be, oh, AI, like that sounds very difficult and complicated. Like artificial intelligence sounds complex. Like, I don't know. I'm not a coder. I'm not a tech person. Like, I shouldn't be using this. Like, I don't know how to use it. I saw some similar mindsets, I think, related to the range of emotions that you all saw there. Um, there's also, as we know, a whole lot of potential and some exciting attributes related to this as well. And I'll talk a little bit about how some of those pieces show up. Yep, that's something as well. Yeah, absolutely, a common mindset that can happen. I would also say not just teachers, but across like a lot of industries. This idea that AI is going to replace a lot of roles, and that's definitely a common narrative as well. So this is my big goal for our time together. If by the end of this session we can accomplish this one objective, I'm going to feel very good about our time together. I'm going to feel like I did my job with the time that I had. I want you to walk away with very concrete strategies and tactics to implement and talk about AI across your community, loosely defined, whatever community means for you. So before we do that, just to make sure we're on the same page, I recognize that I'm likely talking to folks who have some proficiency around AI slash even expertise around AI, but I want to just make sure that in case some of you are entering this space and this is your first experience trying to learn more about AI, dip your toe in the water, that we are coming up with just common definitions about artificial intelligence and what we mean when we're talking about that, because that is important to the change management aspect of this, right? So when we talk about AI, we're specifically talking about generative AI. A lot of these tools like ChatGPT, Gemini, they are what are called generative AI tools. Now, just to show you how they work, I'm going to define what that means, but I'm not going to define. I actually asked ChatGPT to define for me what this is. So if you're curious about what generative AI is, according to ChatGPT, this is what it is. Generative AI is a type of artificial intelligence that can create new content, images, music, text, videos, by learning from vast amounts of existing data, mimicking, that's a very, very important word, right? Mimicking human-like creativity and innovation. It's not human. It's not sentiment. Doesn't have feelings, right? It's not a conscience. It is a tool. It is technology, but it does, in the way that it can communicate to you, make you feel like there is a little bit of an aspect there, but you have to be careful with that, right? And it's not human. Now, just in case that definition still felt a little loaded, let's also talk about what this experience could be like. And by scaffolding, this is another way that ChatGPT can be very fun to use. Explain generative AI to a 5-year-old. This was the next prompt I asked, and this is what it said. Generative AI is like a magic art box that can draw or write new stories and pictures just by asking what you imagine. I then asked ChatGPT for an analogy, and the analogy it gave me to best describe like what generative AI and how it works is a chef, right? So just like a chef in many ways is going to take the many years and experiences and just the training that a chef has about how to best cook something, but it also is going to be defined by the ingredients that they have in front of them, right? If you go to one restaurant, they're cooking with beef, pineapple, teriyaki sauce, and then they go to another restaurant, they're cooking with chicken, spinach, feta cheese, and tomatoes. Even if they're both going to make a hamburger or a sandwich, it may actually look very different based on the training and the expertise of that chef and the ingredients that they have available. In this analogy, think of the ingredients as data, right? Generative AI, the data sources are going to be very different, and the way that they get that data is different. And then obviously the parameters that they set, the neural networks that they have is going to be different. The way that they make connections is different. So you can kind of think of it like a chef, minus the human part, obviously, but just to make sure that we're speaking on the same page here. Now, what's AI good at? Just and then this will really get into the actual implementation piece here, but just for the last couple of table setting pieces. In my experience, when I've used AI, I have found that those bullet points on the left are some of the things that I have found it to be most helpful for when I'm using tools like ChatGPT. I find that a lot of those schools that require kind of that like middle cognition thinking, not the highest level thinking that I have to do, but like some of those middle skills, it tends to save me a lot of time there, right? So in instances where I would have to spend a bunch of time wordsmithing something, maybe brainstorming ideas, right? Synthesizing, summarizing, transcribing, simplifying something. I think it does really well when you're giving it good prompts and being able to do that. Now, I also asked ChatGPT, what would you say you could be used for? The image on the right is what it said. And so you can see a little bit of a difference there in perspectives. I feel like the jury is still out on answering questions based on like very thoughtful knowledge, depending on if you're asking for sources or not. I think there's some better tools out there than AI, generative AI tools to use. So an example would be like something like Perplexity, where they're actually pulling from real academic studies or something when you're using versus a generative AI tool. But for the rest, I would say that there's some alignment there. That being said, I mean, I'd love to know in the chat just quickly here before we really jump in, what are you using AI for? So you all have decided to show up to the session, which leads me to believe that you believe that your school or organization should be having conversations around implementing or talking about AI. What are some of the ways that you're using it? And so I'm curious to just see what comes up for folks here. Feel free to write in the chat if somebody wants to come off mute too and say something. You're welcome to say something too if it's easier. Got a couple comments in the chat here. Brainstorming, coding, creative, timing. Yep. A lot of first drafts. Yeah. Yeah. Lesson planning. Never used it. Okay. Well, welcome. And that's absolutely okay. Thanks for being here. And hopefully, over the course of this experience, you can get some context on some use cases that might be helpful to use. Grammarly. Yeah. So a lot of sharpening emails there, content generation. Yeah. All right. So a variety of ways that we're using it here as well. So happy to just see that, again, it's helpful for our applicable use cases in a variety of ways. There's not really a tremendous consensus. And I did see some overlay between some of the things I mentioned as well. Okay. We're going to get into the real tactics and strategy now. And I want to give you a sense of how my mind works and how I'm thinking about the best way to think about this based on just my years of experience in elevating the voices of my podcast, as I mentioned before. So what I think is going to be really important when you talk about implementation is you have to really define implementation at which level, right? Because when you're thinking of something like a very complex multi-department organization, the way that that implements your strategies and tactics need to look very different for maybe I'm just implementing it on a 4-person team, right? And so there's also, I think, a layer of intentionality to this in the sense that from my perspective, I would encourage us to start with ourselves, right? Really enhancing, developing our own learning, developing our own perspectives on and vision for what it looks like. Then thinking about our immediate network, then thinking about teams. Then you start to think about organizations and systems. Finally, what you're going to notice is over the next couple of slides, they're a little word heavy, but I'm not going to sit here and do that. But the reason I did that is because I'm hoping to just give this slide deck to you all and you can use it as is. But you're going to notice that there's 3 different colored highlights on these slides. Anything that's in yellow is an AI use case that you can actually use related to that level, whether it's the me level, the people level, the teams, the organization. Anything that's in blue is a change management application. So like, how should you be talking about this to like validate the fact that there is a change happening and you want people to be bought in? Anything that's in green is like a concrete strategy or tactic that does not require AI, just something that you would use when you were trying to implement any initiative in a school. So that being said, want to just make sure we have that primer, and I'll obviously repeat as we go throughout a little bit what it looks like so that we're on the same page here. We're going to start with the me level though. So why start with the me? my perspective on this versus like going the other way, because not everything has to be grassroots. Obviously, as we know, there are some stuff top down. I have a very simple explanation for this, which is right now, actually across the field, there isn't actually a lot of data. There are, excuse me, there's not a lot of guidance and policies, concrete guidance and policies from a lot of top level institutions about how this should be implemented and talked about in schools and organizations. Currently, I think there's about 6 or 7 states in the United States. I would say I know the European Union has a couple of guidance and policies related to this as well. I think mostly it's around like data and privacy, but there are some pieces that have come out. But given the fact that change is happening so quickly, I have a tremendous amount of compassion for some of these systems that are trying to develop guidance and policies here, because I know it's complex and I know that they're trying to throw a dart at a moving target. But the impact of that is there's not a bunch of things you can look at the top level to then inform how you might do this for your team or at the individual level. So that being said, we would then really have to think about what could a grassroots approach look like to being able to successfully do this, right? So that's my rationale for starting with the me. So at the me level, I think a lot of this needs to just start with exploring, learning, and iterating. So if you are not using tools like ChatGPT, I would really invite you and encourage you spend some time just using it, right? Before building a policy, before like spending a lot of time, I think one of the best things you can actually do for yourself to just like really understand what the experience is like. Because I can tell you, just as somebody who's now spent over 1,000 hours using tools like ChatGPT, my experience in the first couple of hours using it, and even my conceptions of AI prior to using it, as I mentioned earlier, compared to what it is now, has like tremendously evolved over that time, right? And just in those first couple of hours, as you're starting to use the tool, as you're learning what it's good at, as you're learning where the biases are, it's gonna get your mind thinking tremendously about use cases, about best ways to talk and implement this within your school context. So, from a change management perspective, what is important to recognize at the me level, the individual level, if you will? What's important to recognize is, believe it or not, even though AI is just a tool, there is actually some real emotional responses I think that I've heard people say that they have when they're using artificial intelligence tools. Slash, some of you may have felt the same way if you have used them. I've heard things such as, they are believing that it feels like very human like, or they think it's a human, and they have to like remind themselves, no, this is just a tool. They find themselves using things like thank you, please, and trying to write it very respectfully when they're typing, because they're talking to it as if it's a human, and it's not. So that is naturally an emotion that can come up, and as you keep using it, you will then develop your technical lens to realize it's not that, but that requires training and thoughts. Some other reflections that I've heard: thoughts about people thinking they're going to be replaced. I think someone actually put that in the chat a little while ago. That is something that comes up a lot. Feeling guilt about how easy it is to create some things now that used to take much longer. So I've actually talked to a lot, I've done presentations as well for groups of counselors and teachers. They're using it to say create a lesson plan or create emails that they're going to use. And they're like, man, I feel bad because this normally takes me 35 minutes to do. And I just did it in like 2.5 seconds. And my response there is like, yeah, that's like valid. It's valid that you're feeling that way. This is very different from how you've been doing your work over the course of your career. And then usually I respond with, now knowing that you have that time back, think about all the things you can do that are indistinguishably you, that and can rely on your expertise, that now you can do, and then you can have AI tools do, like, outsource some of those things that you were spending so much time on, maybe that didn't actually require the same amount of time. So all of those come at this change management level, right? And I would just say the best thing you could do here when you're having conversations with folks, or even you're checking in with yourself, is like acknowledge those things. That's okay. Like, it's okay to have an emotional response here to that. From a very tactical perspective, I think one of the best things you can do at this level is just start to assess. Like, when I'm thinking about my job, or you're encouraging somebody else to do this and thinking about their job, like, when I think about my job, what are some of the things that I'm really good at, or I aspire to be good at, I really want to be even better at? And then what are some of those things that, like, I just spend so much time in the day doing that I should not be spending that much time doing? I think as you inventory that list, you may then think of some ways that you might be able to use AI tools, as an example, to just totally eliminate those time suckers, or do them in like 50% of the time. And then there may even be some ways for those AI tools to help enhance and make you go from good to great at something based on the way that you can use those tools. And so I think just thinking about your work is a very helpful initial step, and then thinking about AI applications. And then finally, an AI application, use AI to brainstorm your cases for your role. So if you're like, man, like this is what I got so far about my job, but I might be missing some stuff. You can upload a job description. You can even say, hey, I'm a school counselor in a school. What, can you tell me 25 things a school counselor may normally be doing in a school? And that might help you come up with things that you might have missed so that you don't have to think of all of it. You can use the AI tool to help you do it. So those are just some ways you can use AI tools to do some of that brainstorming as we talked about earlier in some of those use cases. I'd love to hear from you all. So for my folks here with some AI proficiency and expertise, like what are your AI learning pro tips? Like how are you currently learning about AI? How are you applying? Like any advice you would share at the me level here as folks are doing? And I'll just hold a little bit of space here for us to just share some reflections. Social media. Yeah, it can be great. There's a lot of folks right now sharing some great use cases on social media. Totally. I would also add to that YouTube podcast, obviously. Shameless plug to podcasts because I have one, but there's a lot of other great ones, even besides mine, that talk a lot about artificial intelligence. Thank you. I appreciate that. So, social media can be one. Any other thoughts here? Your AI learning pro tips, ways that you find it helpful to learn?
Daniel, I'll chime in if that's all right. I'll just
Yeah, jump on in. Mhm.
been finding a lot of success with both myself and with my teachers with just getting them in platform. So like it's something where I think there's a lot of mysticism around this. So like giving people the opportunity like in a safe space. So like, in a Zoom with people that you trust, like I'm with you. We're gonna talk about some ideas and like kind of see where it goes. Cause I think there's a lot of people still under the assumption that they're going to break it or use something incorrectly. Um, when it's still so new that there's guide rails, but to your point, there's not rules in a lot of places. Um,
Yeah.
so that's what we would do is just getting people in.
Yeah, appreciate that, Kevin. Also, Laura, Maria, I appreciate your comments in the chat here. Kevin, that's actually a really great segue to the next layer because I think that is a fantastic way that all of us could not only continue to enhance our learning, but just be great colleagues, right? To our the folks that we work with, make their lives easier, help to scaffold this experience for them. And that's when I think about the people level, that's exactly what I recommend. So thanks, Kevin, for throwing me that alley oop there. When I think about the people level, and especially the change management. So I think Kevin said this well. When you think about the change management for people, you have to remember, just like we talked about before, everybody is coming in already with their own beliefs and perspectives about AI. AI has probably been the most talked about subject I would think about across media, probably in the world over the last 15 months, right? Now, that's good in some ways, but the bad thing there is that there now folks are going to have a lot of perspectives and opinions about what artificial intelligence is, but they may have actually have never even used the tools before. So they're saying like, oh, this is going to be, a killer for our jobs. This is going to be a killer for cheating. But then it's like, well, have you actually tried it? And they haven't, right? And so you have to just remember that when you're talking to colleagues is like they may be coming in with a lot of that. So I think the best way to work with that is like number one, just as we mentioned before, just acknowledge what they're feeling. It's like, yeah, that's all valid. That's all fair. Appreciate that. I think the second thing is like, don't be afraid to like name bias, privacy, cheating, be explicit on what is unknown. Like we said, I'm excited about AI. I'm cautiously optimistic about it. I don't think it's perfect. I'm not going to sit here and like pound my fists on the table and say, no, AI is going to transform the world and it's going to be perfect and it's going to all these things. No, there's some real valid concerns that we also need to be talking about at the same time. And I don't think that that means that we shouldn't be using AI tools. I would just invite, our colleagues hold the complexity of both of those things being true, right? There are some things we still have to work out, and this could potentially also make your life very easier in the short term, right? I think both of those things are valid. To Kevin's point, one thing I would also recommend at the change management level is try to contextualize use cases that you show them, work with them to do it, solve their problems, right? Let me give you an example of this. So I was actually, and you'll notice on the screenshot of the right here, and let me paint the picture of what took place and where that screenshot came from. So I was doing a school counselor training for a group of counselors at a high school. And I had them do an intake survey right before I actually went into the school. And the intake survey, I saw a lot of common words that we had just talked about around these perspectives for how they were thinking about AI. Difficult, coding, cheating, frustration, like all of those things, more negative mindset type verbiage, right? And as I was getting set up for the presentation, about 30 of them roll in. I heard a group of a few counselors talking about how they were working through the Bell schedule and how it was just feeling very difficult. And then they were just frustrated by some of the work that they were carrying out. So I was like, okay, noted, got that. And so when I started my presentation, the first thing I did before I talked about what AI was, what it should be, is I just pulled up ChatGPT and I said, this is the reason why I'm so excited about tools like AI. And I said, I heard you talking about the Bell schedule earlier. Let me show you a way that you might be able to use this tool to solve or to support some of your tools. I typed in the prompt at the top. I said, generate a Bell schedule scenario for a 7-period class day. And I did that. And then I just hit enter. And as you can imagine, it's thinking and then starts to type. I saw everybody's faces went from intrigue just looking at it to go, that was their reaction, right? So I really got very excited about their reaction because that was my initial reaction when I used it. It was a very emotional a reaction of excitement that changed the tone and the energy of our entire training once I was able to contextualize a use case to solve their problems. Now, what I had to do as a good facilitator towards the end of that was, now that they were so excited and invested, I did have to like temper that a little with like, okay, there's a lot of good things it can do, but let's also talk about the drawbacks, so that we were just putting everything in the front. But I think the more you can show folks how it can solve their problems, it's gonna create buy-in, right? They're gonna be invested in learning more because it's actually gonna make their lives easier, right? I don't think if you walk up to a teacher, a school counselor, a school leader tomorrow and you say, hey, what if I could save you 4 hours of time next week? I'm pretty sure you have their attention, right? And they're gonna be interested in what you have to say. Um, in terms of tactics, an additional tactic besides contextualizing use cases, I would recommend make a different list of stakeholders in your school community or your organization if you don't work in a school, if you're working in a nonprofit. So that could be school counselors, teachers, maybe program people, could be development folks, finance folks, tech folks, and then start to ask yourself, what are their problems? What are their goals? What are their motivations? And then you can also then start to think about how AI could help to support them. If you don't have answers to any of these questions, use ChatGPT to help you, or AI to help you, and another AI tool, or ask them, right? Say, hey, I'm actually just thinking about a way to be able to have a conversation AI that would feel hyper useful for you. I actually don't know much about what your day-to-day looks like. Can you tell me a little bit about some of the big goals that you have for the year? Can you tell me about some of those big thorns or sand in your shoe that is making your job frustrating? And just make notes of that and say, and then you can start to explore how AI might be able to help them. So then some other AI use cases you can use within the people context, you could use it to develop an agenda for a meeting you might want to have with somebody. You could use it to prompt questions for discussion. So instead of thinking of questions, maybe you come into that meeting with 3 or 4 questions to start with, and it supported you with thinking about the most thoughtful questions. You could ask for problems during the meeting or in advance, and then do AI think alouds like I just described that I did with that school counseling group. I know that we had mentioned a little bit before some other, I know Kevin gave us a great idea there. Any other pro tips that you all might have in helping others that I haven't named here? When you are having a conversation with an individual or a group of people, what else might you do? And I'll just hold some space here. Folks can come off mute if you'd like, or you can put some comments in the chat, whatever you'd prefer.
I'm just gonna unmute here if that's okay. All
Totally,
right.
jump on in.
Yeah, so one thing I think, especially when thinking about teachers, we got to think about time and actually giving them time to explore and play around. Because there was that recent week report that they were talking about during the keynote of, the percentage of teachers who've used AI. And one of the biggest reasons why they don't is because they don't have time. They have too much going on. So I love your thought of, let's see what they're struggling with right now. Let's solve that problem. And then also just build in that time.
Carly, really appreciate that thought. I mean, between you and Kevin, I'm just like, I appreciate all these alley oops. Like, I feel like you all just keep throwing the ball perfectly to like what I'm about to say next. So thank you.
Perfect. Yeah.
It's like, so I'm giving myself a pat on the back for the intuitiveness of what I have to say here, because it seems to be aligning well so far. So now to
Great.
talk about the teams level, I would just echo what Carly just said, which is absolutely right. When you think about groups of people, You are not going to make friends when you think about implementation or talking about AI if you create additional add-on spaces that people have to go to. You will create enemies if you are adding 60 minutes to an already busy workday that already has so many meetings, that already has, so many check-ins and all these things to just talk about this random thing, right? You need to think about how can our training, how can our meetings absorb, right, some of these conversations versus creating new one-off spaces. Nobody wants an extra 60 minutes on their week to talk about some of these things. So when we get to the teams level, now is when we start to think a little bit more about systems, right? We have to think about systems and how those things work in processes. We can't just think about people anymore, right? Up to this point, a lot of it was about the dynamics and the relationships that we hold between people. But now we have to start putting on some of our systems level hats and thinking about how some of those pieces are going to be critical when we're talking about groups of people. So that being said, I'm going to jump to the tactics box first, the green one, just because I think Carly said it tremendously well, which is when you're building in AI conversations, build it into those training and meeting spaces. Don't make them add-ons. Like I said, you're going to create enemies, not friends, right? I think this is also a place where, depending on where you'd like to land. So let's say that you're having some initial conversations and they're going really well, and you're like, "This is going great. Like we see some value in developing some AI tools." I even saw some folks in the chat saying something around like AI policies and wanting to take the first step in doing that. That's great, but who's going to do it? Who's going to do it? What's the process? How's that going to get done? Right. And this is, I think, a very helpful place where, when you think about just good tactics and good things that you could be doing, you want to make sure that you have a thoughtful project plan with very clear roles. I would highly recommend a framework that I use a lot when I think of clear roles, especially when lines of reporting are very different, right? Like your boss may not actually be the person you're working on the project with. You have a bunch of folks who have the same positional authority that all have to work together effectively. I tend to use the MOCA framework a lot. I linked an article here that you all will have to read more about what that is if you're curious. You can use whatever framework you'd like. But the point is that if you want to do something like creating an AI policy, adopting a tool within your school, you're like, we've made the decision that we want to explore bringing ChatGPT to our school. Okay, great. What's that project plan look like, though? What's the timeline? How's that going to get done? Who's using it? Right? To what extent are we using it? And you have to start to answer some of those questions. And it starts with knowing who's doing it, right? So who's the owner? Who's managing the owner? Who's helping in this? Who's consulting in this, right? And who's assisting in this? And then finally, who's approving this, right? So as you think more about those things, that's going to give you your best chance of success when you fundamentally think about getting and starting to create something that's going to have lasting change, right? You want to actually make sure that we don't just say, yeah, ChatGPT is a good idea, or creating an AI policy is a good idea. Then we look up and it's been 6 months and nothing has been done, right? Because so many other priorities got in the way. And then we didn't actually have systems in place to be able to ensure that the work continued there. Leverage existing experts and processes to align this. So yeah, many of us may not currently be AI experts, right? But AI is not the only important variable when you talk about bringing AI to our teams and organization, right? We have to talk about the organization too. So that may require experts on data teams. It may require folks on the tech team. It may require folks across program who can really speak to the most applicable use cases there. Implementing AI is less about AI in of itself, and it's just about good quality implementation, right? The way that you would implement large scale initiatives or thoughts across your team, a lot of those same practices and levers are probably going to be the same even when you think about AI implementation. So you want to consult your experts, right? You want to ask yourself, how can this be true across some of the existing spaces and thoughts that we have there as well? Now, when you think about some of the change management here, like I said, you can read some of my thoughts there around some of the change management in blue. Grounding in AI applications to support, acknowledging trade-offs. So again, you'll notice that we are now going from like emotional experiences to systems level consideration. Trade-offs tends to be the big one. So if we're going to invest more time, energy, resources to have conversations about AI, what are we now not doing, right? What are we deprioritizing in that process? We have to acknowledge that trade-offs are going to happen in that exchange, but if having these conversations now is actually going to play a longer term dividend, it's important to name that as well. But this is where some of the conversation, the verbiage, the way that we talk about it, the altitude is going to start to look a little bit different here, right? And then finally, in the yellow, when you think about some AI use cases, These are some of the ways that I think they could be very helpful. I think AI can be tremendously helpful here in some of the administrative tactics to just like capture a lot of these things, right? Because now when you talk about having a meeting across the team, there's 5, 10, 15 people in that room all having conversation. You want to make sure that you're capturing very careful notes, right? Transcribing the conversation, summarizing really good thoughts, thinking about next steps, right? AI can actually help make a lot of those processes very efficient so that you are continuing to do a good job of keeping everybody informed, everybody in the loop, reporting back what happens, right? Making sure we're talking about trade-offs as you go through this experience and doing that. So want to just hold some space here as we've done for the last couple of ones. Based on your team, based on your organization, how have you all seen AI helpful? Any tips that I might be missing here for how we should be having some of these conversations at the team level?
Hey Daniel, I'm gonna jump in really fast. This is Laurel. Sorry, I don't have my camera on because my dog has been freaking out. So, but I love what you've been saying, and I think it's so true. I've been doing some trainings, and what Carly said earlier about giving space and trying it out, but I think there's this overwhelm too, especially for our Google districts, now that Gemini has become so embedded into every single thing. I mean,
Mhm.
it started rolling out last week, and then everywhere you go, it's just there. And it's like it can be very, very overwhelming. And then is there I think what you talked about earlier about that communication. I had some teachers like, are we expected to just like know what to do? Are we expected to like know how to use this? And then they're like, or how are our kids? And so this like, anxiety is just flooding
Mhm.
people. And I think I love the idea of let's put a pin in it, take a breath, and see how we can explore it, but also like not get overwhelmed ourselves, because that's when I feel like people shut down. And you can have all the policies in the world, you can have all of the great things that you've been talking about, but if people are like so overwhelmed, it just gets this shutdown mode. So I love the idea of showing them how this can like enhance what you're already doing, but you don't have to use it, but here's how we can go forward. So yeah, it's been a real interesting challenge, but also opportunity for these great conversations.
Yeah. No, well said, Laura. I appreciate you for voicing that over and totally agree. I mean, I think there's, like I said, the unique landscape of artificial intelligence is it's equal parts. Everybody's talking about it, and yet there's still so much that's uncertain, which is kind of a weird place to exist in, right? Where there's so much evolving, yet everybody's talking about it. But and I think the natural response, as you were saying, Laura, is that there's so many folks who can feel just very overwhelmed about like, oh my God, am I expected to use like 20 tools now? I got to teach all my students how to do that. No, it's okay. And if you actually decide like you're not going to be a chat GPT guru tomorrow or something, you're okay. The world's not going to end. You're not going to be a bad teacher now. You're not going to be bad at your job anymore, right? There's still time to learn. There's still time to, take some time to just breathe, to scaffold this experience. I think the best thing we could do right now is to just take what we do really well as educators, good pedagogy, good learning practices, good structures of implementation, and just apply it to this new use case. Because fundamentally, that's what it is, right? It's like you could think of it in the same way that your school may have had a large new district initiative or rollout that required a level of change management. It required a level of a new process or protocol that we had to implement. It also required some other things, right? Think of AI as that project. So in year one, we based on our tolerance and our school community and our organization and how overwhelmed everybody is, maybe how tapped out we are, because what we're also not acknowledging is that there's going to be different bandwidths to this conversation based on what everybody's holding, right? Right now, if your team is a group of teachers, if you try to have a conversation right now with the group of teachers, I think today about AI, I think you're going to get some very difficult reactions, even if it's a great tool, because it is February. It is very difficult right now. Teachers are at a 10. This ain't the time to do that, right? Now, if you're talking to somebody saying like a department where their workflow is a little bit different, somebody on a development team, somebody in maybe a technology space, maybe they are a little bit more receptive to having like that type of conversation. So I think to your point, Laura, it's very critical to just scaffold this experience for the stakeholders, your colleagues on the team, and then align on like what feels good for us. Maybe in year one, it is just about learning. Maybe our goal is we're going to have 2 AI trainings by the end of the year, and our goal is to have an AI policy. Cool. That sounds good. I think that's great progress in year one, right? The goal is to lay down bricks that are going to build a strong foundation for the world to come. The goal doesn't have to be we're going to adopt 50 new AI tools and everybody has to be experts at it by the end of the year, right? And I think we've all been in as a part of use cases where that didn't go too well when we tried to do it that way. Seeing some other comments in the chat here. Let me also just acknowledge some of these. I think important to add. Yep. Curriculum review. Yeah. Transcribing tool. Ooh, that's a good one. That's a really good one, Mariana. I have to say that I don't know that I would be like the expert to speak on that because that is such a good question. I will say that there's a lot of good AI transcription tools, right? Things such as Otter AI, MeetGeek. I personally use Descript. You can even use like ChatGPT or tools like that to do the transcription. But around some of the protection with some of the things that could be said around, protecting that, I don't know that there's any I would sit here and endorse in that context. I know, obviously, I think as many of us know with ChatGPT in particular, if you get the like team and enterprise view, there's a way to like say, we don't want our training data opt-in to that, but I don't know that I would be confident in saying that requires that. It's such a good question. There is probably a sophisticated way to be able to use those transcribing tools for those meetings to make your life easier without violating privacy. And I would just invite anybody maybe who has some thoughts to respond to her there because that is such a good question. I'm going to go to the organization level now, right? So we're starting to think bigger here. And when I think organization, I'm starting to think not just the team, but teams of teams, right? Departments, multi-departments. And so at this level, what you're going to notice is the opportunity is immense, right? Because now you get to the point where it no longer lives with people, which is to a certain extent a good thing, right? Because there's oftentimes initiatives or knowledge that lives with one person. When that person quits or leaves or goes somewhere else, it's all gone, or that initiative dies, right? So when you can be successful at creating initiatives that have processes, have practices at the organizational level, that is you starting to be able to create foundational change that will be persistent to staffing turnovers over years, right? Which is fundamentally what we want, right? When we're talking, if we actually truly do believe that AI tools can transform education in some capacity, maybe you don't, but maybe you do. But if you do believe that, then fundamentally what you may want is foundational change. And that change happens at the organizational level, right? Where it's absent of individual relationships and it's built into systems and processes, right? That being said, it gets harder to do that, right? Because now you're talking multiple relationship dynamics. You're talking about systems that you have to navigate and wallow through, right? You're also talking about the highest impact, but you're also talking about the highest risks, a lot more consideration. So there's just a lot more to consider here, right? But I think it can be worth it if you can figure out how to do it in the context of your unique organization. Maybe not initially. Start with the me, start with people, then get to teams, then work to organization, right? When you get there. But what might this look like? So some of the questions at the change management level that you have to think about and answer as you're thinking about this, the first is probably the most important, which is you have to just think about how AI might transform your vision or your mission, right? Now, if you're in education, you're probably reading this, you're like, maybe not too much, maybe a little bit, maybe some of the skills or some of the beliefs around what we believe our students should be having or walking out of this experience of K to 12 or our higher ed experience with, maybe that actually is evolving and that's different. And we want that to be reflected in our mission and our vision, which then would be reflected in your priorities, your goals, your practices, etc. But it may not. But then on the other hand, you have other organizations, such as workforce sector organizations, that may have drastically different visions, missions, based on the fact that some of these AI tools are now in existence. I even think about something, maybe a little bit of a crude analogy, but something that recently came to mind. I know Tyler Perry is an example. If you all are familiar with him, he's, very famous actor, director, all the things, right? In media, he was in the process of creating an $800 million studio, right? Because he clearly had this vision for, his future and his strategic plan of how he wanted to continue to expand his media empire. He ended up stopping the development of that because of the announcement behind Sora. And if you don't know what Sora is, you can easily Google and see what it is. It is a highly anticipated text to video AI platform created by OpenAI, the same people who create ChatGPT. And I guess that had rattled him so much that he felt like he had to drastically alter his plans. And so there are some organizations that may be feeling like they're in that boat as well. So depending on where your organization is at, you can fall across the spectrum there to, doesn't really change what we do too much. This is what it's about, to, wow, this is actually going to look very different in 5 years. You also then want to just think more granularly about, well, if our mission and vision are different, or if they're enhanced, well, how does this impact our way of being and our values, right? Are we asking people to show up differently in how they show up to the work, how they're showing up things, what they're prioritizing? It may have an impact there as well, right? How we're expecting them to do their work. And then finally, it's just the day-to-day experience, right? With some of these AI tools, with how long it used to take to do some things versus how short it could be now. Are there different expectations set on the day-to-day experience and how people are using their time during the workday? So I think these are some of the types of questions at the organizational level that leaders, you all, will have to grapple with as you think about organizational level change and how AI may or may not be a part of that, right? Specific tactics that we'll look at, we're really thinking about, and I think this very much aligns with what you'll see at the team level. I heard multiple kind of double clicks on this, and I would, triple click on it at the organizational level here. Timing is everything, right? You can't just like wake up one day and say, we're going to decide to flip the table and do AI stuff, right? If you do that and you go to the senior leaders of your organization and you pound the fist on the table saying we're going to do that, and it is totally just not aware or conscious to the systems and the way that organization develops, you're not going to get the response that you hope to get unless you have some kind of transformational relationship with that individual leader that somehow manages to elevate beyond the systems and the priorities of an organization, which I think is very, very rare, right? Systems level leaders are going to prioritize organizational priorities even above individual relationships most of the time, right? When you think about their behaviors and how they operate. So then you have to work within the systems. That means thinking about how your planning cycle could actually be a part of some AI conversations related to what that looks like. Hold some time now. So for many of us, those planning cycles happen in a school. That's during the summer. Start asking for time now for the summer. Don't ask for it to, the day before. Ask and see now if you can get some days. Can I get 2 hours of time during our next institutional training days during the summer, right before we leave as an offboarding? Can I get 30 minutes to have this conversation, right? Those are some ways you could do it there. Start doing some work on your goals meeting your priorities. And you'll notice I'm not saying AI goals. I'm truly just talking about, as of today, the goals that you set for this year, are they actually meeting the priorities that you have set over this year or over the next 3 years? I think as you get some information there, which is yes, it is meeting here, or no, it's not, you could then maybe layer on the question, hey, based on what we know about AI, is there actually a way or a use case that may actually help us to build on some of our areas of growth for how our goals are meeting our priorities? I don't actually recommend doing it the other way. I think the best way to think about AI is think about your organization, your problems, right? And then ask AI how AI can help. I don't think you have to say, well, let's just add AI tools absent of like very hyper concrete use cases, right? So that's a way you can do that. Start dedicating capacity and resources into your yearly plan. So whether that's an annual plan, campus improvement plan, district improvement plan, any of those things, start to outline resources. We are going to dedicate $10,000 towards hiring outside consultants for AI training over this next year. We are going to, bake in 10% of this person's role to explore AI and develop an AI policy over the course of the next year. You have to bake those into the systems and the conditions that you have if you actually want it to get done at the organizational level. If you do implement an AI tool or process, start thinking about how you're going to evaluate it. Yeah, ChatGPT is dope, but if you're going to spend it, it costs $20 a person at a team membership. If you're out of school and you just drop 15 grand to have a ChatGPT membership, how are you actually going to evaluate that 15 grand was worth it? Right? You want to think about that. You want to think about the evaluation behind the investment that you're making to impact your organization, whether it's tied to organizational outcomes, financial sustainability, the team culture effect it's having. Any of those pieces could be critical at this stage. And then finally, in terms of the last step I would offer here is, as it's coming up, there are actually some helpful AI policies, state guidance, and research that can be especially helpful at this stage of planning once you finally get to this stage, right? I will share a couple of links in the appendix of this. There are a few states, there's a few people in my networks I know that have examples that they've publicly posted as well. Some of my podcast episodes, folks are talking about it as well. So I will share some of those resources. So if you're curious to just know what those systems level policies look like, you have some examples. So you don't have to start from scratch. You can see what other folks have done as well. Regarding AI use cases, you can see there are a couple of different ways I think it can help. I think a lot of this, again, you'll notice it's more administrative stuff. I don't know that I have found a bunch of current use cases around like really hyper strategic planning that I would really like recommend AI for. I think it helps a lot with some of those like middle cognitive skills, administrative tasks, summarize, synthesis, those types of things. But when you get strategic planning, I mean, that's where we get paid the big bucks, right? To do that work and to take care of it. And AI can be very helpful, but it's going to be helpful in reducing some of the time suckers so that we can really think through there. Now, again, this could change. This is my thinking as of today, but I mean, the beauty of like some of these AI tools is they continue to evolve. So it could be different in the future. So I'd love to just maybe hold some space here before I get to the closing here to talk a little bit about, or to invite some perspectives, like any other organizational levers that I might have missed that may also be critical to address, any advice that folks would offer around foundational change, creating foundational change.
I'll chime in. I know that for us, a big kind of lever for a lot of this is like, so I work in an area where there's a lot of school districts, and we are a bigger school district in that area, but that we leverage like peers in other districts. Cause like, even with, I support 13,000 kids in 21 schools, there's me and my colleague like doing this work. But if I reach out to other districts, I've got peers, I've got multiple people. It also kind of brings some shared support that way as well. So like we use both our internal organization, but then also as a state, like other public schools, like what are you doing? How are you driving this work? And that honestly helps our superintendent more than anything, because he needs to know that like, yeah, Sarah goes to school here, but she lives in this other district with her mom where she works. And like, we kind of need a unified voice with a lot of this stuff. So it's been very helpful for us.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. That was such helpful advice. Even at this level, relationships still matter, I think, as you so greatly said. Any other perspectives folks want to share at this point? Feel free to type in the chat or come off mute, whatever you'd like. All right. If there's any other questions or things that come up, feel free to throw them in the chat. I feel like that's enough teacher wait time. So finally, I just wanted to include a quick note on just who we serve. I'm not going to, spend as much time on this slide as the other ones because I really wanted to make sure the tactics were clear. But who we serve obviously is very critical. And I think we understand that. And I think as educators, we know that this is a very vital perspective. But when you're talking about your organization, you serve someone, right? Whether it's students, whether it's families, whether it is your customers, if it's a specific product, and making sure that their perspectives outside of the internal organization work is elevated in this is equally as important. I have a lot of episodes on my podcast where I've talked with students, and I can tell you this about students: they're brilliant. They have so many opinions around AI. They've been using these tools a lot longer than the majority of adults. So like, it is such a missed opportunity for us when we're thinking about strategic tactics that we want to bring to implementing this, to not include their perspectives and to allow them to co-create this experience. So we just wanted to make sure that I said that. It's also critical that along the way you report back on what you're learning, what it means, right, from a change management perspective, because they're not always going to be the decider, right? Like fundamentally, it's going to be the superintendent, it's going to be the principal that makes the decision. But that doesn't mean that we can't let them into how the decision was made, what the considerations were, what the trade-offs were, so that they're at least aware of like how we got there, right? And then they have spaces along the way to share input, to help co-create this additionally. I think AI can be really great here, especially as you think about communities and the instances where you may serve communities that they don't speak the language that maybe you speak or some folks at your school are positioned to speak. So language translation with tools like ChatGPT is actually really strong. They have found equal performance, especially in, I would say, the most like common languages in the United States for our student communities, things such as like Mandarin, Spanish, Vietnamese, Portuguese, some of those ones, they've actually found that they're pretty high performing there with some of the studies that they've posted. I know that I don't have too much time, so I wanted to just wrap with the final 10 that I'll put in the slide deck. Wanted to just double click on the last point because I know I heard this a little bit, and I know that this might be a lot of overwhelming information. It's okay to breathe, right? All of this isn't expected to be done tomorrow. It's not going to take you, you don't have to do this in the next month. Just start to play the long game, start to think backwards, and then also just give your time to have conversation, to learn how these tools work, to develop an opinion, to develop a vision of how you can see these actually helping. And then you can get into the tactical, right? And if you're there already, I think that's fantastic. And I'm excited for you and the journey that you'll take, but you don't have to do that all tomorrow. It's okay to breathe. You haven't missed the train to get on the station yet. We're not there yet, right? So it's okay. That being said, I'll link this as well. All of these images are linked. So if you want to listen to some episodes that may be hyper relevant to you as you think about this, I have talked with chief academic officers, superintendents, CEOs. They share their perspectives. I have a website where I post blogs. I have my podcast, and I also, you can book me for learning experiences. Just wanted to mention those as well. I have my LinkedIn as well. Feel free to connect with me with any of those. Thank you very much for your time, y'all. I really appreciate it. Thanks also for having some dialogue with me there. And if I can answer any questions, I'm happy to do so and happy to stay on just for a little before we jump to the next session here. Otherwise, I hope you enjoy the rest of the SequoiaCon sessions, some great sessions over the next day and a half here.